I'm very, very happy that the Wilson Center is the first think tank to be honored to show the film that you have just seen. As all of you know, or I hope you know, the documentary was secretly filmed in Iran by brave women and men who risked arrest to bring Nasrin's Sotoudeh's story to us and the world. Director Jeff Kaufman, who will be part of this conversation, I'm looking at him right now, was not allowed to enter Iran because of a 2011 film he'd made about religious persecution in Iran. We're so grateful to Jeff and to those who gathered the footage. And the Wilson Center, as I said, is very honored to show the film. What you may not know since the film was made is that Nasrin's health has deteriorated. I just asked Jeff about this. She conducted a 47-day hunger strike protesting the plight of political prisoners, and that strike ended on September 26th. Instead of transferring her from Irvin Prison to a hospital, the Iranian authorities have moved her to Karchuk prison, which has been called, quote, Iran's most dangerous prison for women. Nasrin's crime, for which she was sentenced to 38 years in prison and 148 lashes, most of you know this, was or is her long and persistent fight for the rights of women, children, LGBT prisoners, religious minorities, artists, and journalists. She has fought in the streets and in the courts, and in March 2019 was sentenced for propaganda against the state, advocating against the death sentence, membership in a human rights organization, appearing in public without the hijab, disturbing public order, and encouraging corruption and prostitution. It's even hard to read that. It is just so sad that any country on the planet would consider what she does a crime. So the Wilson Center is obviously proud to be home, intellectual home. I hope it's even more than intellectual, just home. The Wilson family includes another marvelous, legendary Iranian woman who was unjustly imprisoned by the regime, Haleh Esfandiari, who will be on in this panel in a moment, has called Nasrin the pride of and moral voice of Iran. Haleh brought Nasrin's story to us through her connection with Jeff, the director, and continues to illuminate the injustice that Iranian women activists face in prison. She wrote her own latest piece for Middle East Viewpoint that despite the spread of COVID-19 in Irvin Prison, no political prisoners were included among the 85,000 inmates who were furloughed to protect their health. I just want to say about Haleh that I was then a member of Congress when she was in Irvin Prison. I was part of the huge number of folks led by my predecessor, Lee Hamilton, who were outraged by what happened to Haleh. The good news is, after almost a year, she was freed, and she wrote a book about it. But that's not enough for Haleh. What Haleh wants to do is speak out for other women in a similar circumstance. And that's how all of this has come to the Wilson Center. And that is why I'm so proud that she's a member of the Wilson family. So it is my pleasure to welcome Jeff Kaufman to the conversation, and along with Haleh and Merissa Khurma, the program director of our Middle East program. Jeff is a prolific director, producer, and writer with a particular focus on human rights. He has made the documentaries Terrence McNally, Every Act of Life in 2018 about the famous playwright. Another of his documentaries is The State of Marriage, 2015, about the fight for marriage equality in the US. Aren't we happy that finally was achieved? Oh, yes. For now, oh no. The Savoy King, Chuck Webb and the Music That Changed America in 2012, and many more. Jeff has contributed cartoons to the New Yorker and illustrations to the Los Angeles Times, my hometown newspaper, and the New York Times. He's written and illustrated several children's books and hosted daily radio shows in Vermont and Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming the absolute legendary Haleh Esfandiari, the great filmmaker Jeff Kaufman, and our very own, we're proud of her, Middle East director Merissa Khurma, who will now have a conversation.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Harman, for your kind introduction. Jeff and Haleh, thank you for joining us this afternoon in this post-film discussion of a very compelling and important documentary, Nasrin. So I'll start with a few questions to both you and Haleh, Jeff, and then we will take questions from the audience. So for those of you who want to submit your questions, please go ahead and do that into the chat window. So Jeff, I'll start with you as the director and producer and writer of this film. Why did you decide to tell Nasrin's story, and how did this idea of, you called it earlier, a mission, come about?
Thank you, and thanks for this opportunity to share Nasrin's story. Like a lot of stories, it cycles back in several different ways. So let me just say that one significant start to this project is that years ago I was working on a TV show that shall remain nameless, and I was doing some research, and I reached out to someone about a possible project, and the person I spoke to said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that film. You shouldn't do that project. You should do a film about my friend Haleh Esfandiari, who was just arrested in Iran." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm fascinated by human rights in Iran." And I spoke to the person who owned that production company, and they actually let us do a film about Haleh. And so that connected me to her. And one of the things I loved about her work was that it was really based on trying to create bridges between Iran and the West, bridges between Iran and the United States, finding commonalities, finding ways that we can move forward together if only the leaders would get out of the way. I found that deeply moving, and it's been motivating ever since. And that's really something that's at the heart of what Nasrin cares about as well. So about 8 or 9 years ago, we were doing a film with Amnesty International about the persecution of the Baha'i faith in Iran. And one of the things that Baha'is from Iran kept saying was that oftentimes Muslim neighbors, Muslim friends would put themselves at enormous risk to help them out. Because if you're a Baha'i in Iran, you can't get a license to start a business, you can't work for the government, you can't go to college. It's horrendous. And there's also terrible violence against Baha'is as well. And that kind of opening from one faith to another faith, especially at this time in America, was deeply moving to me. No one represents that better than Nasrin Sotoudeh, who has been a great champion not only of the Baha'is in Iran, but other religious minorities, and one of the great champions of women's rights and human rights in the world. So we reached out to her in 2016, said, "Can we do this?" And fortunately, she and her husband Reza said yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. Haleh, I'm going to turn to you now. How does this documentation of Nasrin's journey, which also captures the community that she was part of, that continue to fight for justice, resonate with you personally, given your personal experience as a political prisoner at Evin? You've had a taste of this injustice. So how does this story resonate with you?
Thank you very much, Jane, for your very kind introduction. Thank you, Merissa, for being a wonderful colleague and a great director of the Middle East program. And thank you, Jeff. I must confess, when Jeff called me and told me that he intends to do a film on Nasrin, I was thrilled because, Nasrin is the next generation. I mean, we were maybe the first generation, but she's now the second generation, which is carrying the torch. So I was thrilled, but then I didn't hear from him for quite a while. And then one day he called and he said, "There is the movie." And today was the third time I was watching it. And I really must congratulate you, Jeff, because The first time I watched it, the second time I watched it, but the third time, it moved me to tears. It is such a compelling movie. It grows on you. It brought back memories, of course. When I saw the picture of Evin, for a brief moment, I shuddered. There it was. It is still standing there. And it is known as the most notorious prison in the world. All sorts of things take place in Evin. But then I think moving Nasrin, as Jane mentioned, from Evin to Garchak came as a big shock to me, because Garchak is a prison where you keep criminals. You don't keep political prisoners. I started doing some research and noticed that there has been, over the past couple of years, 15 women political prisoners have been moved to Garchak, back to Evin, moved to Garchak, back to Evin. And my sense is that the Islamic Republic is at a loss of what to do with its women activists, and it is punishing them for basically speaking out their mind and standing up to the Islamic Republic. We have to accept that women have been the only force that from day one have stood up to the regime, to the imposition of the veil, to changing the family law, to taking all their rights away, but they have pushed back. And whatever you see today is their own work. And I must say that Nasrin is exceptional, but there are many other mini Nasrins working with her.
Thank you. Thank you both, Jeff and Haleh. I think one of the most gripping parts about this film is that left an impression on me is the bravery and commitment of not only Nasrin, but also the community of women and men and youth who are working with her, like you said, the mini Nasrins, Haleh, who continue this fight. And many of them were inspired by the work that Nasrin has led, or the work of Shireen Ebadi and Narjis Mohammadi and other activists' work that were unfortunately targeted by the Iranian Authority. It was interesting to see that beyond the work that Nasrin and her colleagues did in the courts, they also were very much connected to the community and sort of building this power at the grassroots level, going all across the country to talk to women about their rights and raise awareness. And this brings me to the question of public opinion. There was a part where Reza, Nasrin's husband, talks about the role of public opinion. So I want to go back to you, Jeff and Haleh, to basically elaborate a little bit more about the importance of public opinion in this fight for justice.
Sure. If I'll start, I'll say that, you mentioned grassroots change, and I don't think that change can come from one country imposing it on another country. But there is great grassroots interest in change and progress in Iran. Over 60% of the people in Iran are under the age of 30. And that says a lot about hope and dissatisfaction and potential. I was just talking to Reza about this last week. Marcia, the producer of the film, and we're also married, and I talk to Reza regularly. And we were asking him about what really will make a difference now for Nasrin and others. And he said just what you said, public opinion, that they really do pay attention. So as you may know, for instance, their daughter, Merissa, was brought into Evin prison about 2 months ago in August, and was facing charges of insulting a guard at Evin prison. But there's been a lot of public outcry about that. And apparently that outcry has made a difference. And it looks like now the authorities are going to drop those charges. The authorities from the judiciary and from the prison system met with Nasrin on Friday to have some discussions. I don't think it really went anywhere, but it also again shows that they feel public pressure. And so the more people can get involved by signing petitions, by having discussions like this, actually, it's not just learning about it, it is actually making a benefit. And by the way, if you go to our website, which is nasrinfilm.com, there's a petition from PEN America that you can sign and be part of that as well.
Great, thank you. Haleh?
You know, there is a very big change since we were in Iran and active on women's issues. I think we laid the foundation for this generation to work on that. And the big change is the existence of social media. You know, I mean, in the past, if a woman activist was arrested, and you wouldn't hear about it except the immediate people around them. Now, they take Nasrin from Evin to Garchak, and within a matter of hours, the whole world who is interested in women, in the women's movement in Iran, will know about it. And automatically, when an injustice is committed, there is a lot of pressure from abroad. In my own case, and I did mention this to Jeff earlier when we talked, is that the more pressure is brought on the regime in Iran to free these women activists, the more you will get a result. It is a combination of pressure from within the country and pressure through social media, and then the think tanks and the civil society groups, they play a very important role, regardless of whether Nasrin will decide to stay in Iran once she's freed or come abroad. But it is the pressure that makes a big difference.
Yeah, thanks, Haleh. I do remember very detailed accounts in your book, My Prison, My Home, about all the different people that came together worldwide, you know, from the media to the NGO community. And as Jeff mentioned, this is this, you know, makes a difference. I'm going to invite Congresswoman Harman to ask a question, or actually let's move on, because I see that, yeah.
No, I can do it.
You're here?
On.
Okay.
I'm here. Don't
Okay.
think. Hold on.
Okay, just making sure. I want to invite you to ask a question before we turn to a few questions from the audience, because unsurprisingly, we have quite a few of them. Go ahead.
Well, I just, you know, my heart breaks to hear all this, and to think about all the women under 30, all the people under 30 who only, let's see, can you see me? Is everything, yeah, okay. Whose only experience has been under this regime. So that's a hard thing to kind of contemplate. I mean, people like Haleh and you too, Jeff, and certainly I worked in the Carter White House, so I remember the dismal beginning of all this. Recall a different Iran. And I'm also from Los Angeles. I guess you are too, Jeff, but you know, which is called Tehrangeles. So I guess my question is not just public outcry, but can we imagine, if assuming nothing else works, that generationally the people of Iran will just soon an overwhelming amount of them will come to espouse the kind of values that Nasrin has, and I hope her case resolves, and I hope she becomes healthy again. But what I'm saying is, at some point, won't it be that this is just, it's impossible to quell the voices of dissent in Iran who want a reasonable quality of life, which they've never known, which I'm not putting this very well, but which to them is not the regime that they live under.
Jen, the generation which grew up under the revolution showed their discontent in 2009, when 1 million, more or less, young people
I remember,
poured into the street and protested the voting. the engineering voting of Ahmadinejad back as president. But you are dealing with a regime which is ruthless, and doesn't shy away from killing when it comes to save its own position. But I believe that eventually there will be change in Iran because the change will come from within. It is the same people who came out into the street will be coming out more and more and more. But then they also will have leaders like Nasrin, and there are others, and I'm just focusing on women who constantly are bringing up the injustices that are done to women, whether it's legally, whether it's socially. So I think there will be a change once they decide that women are not a threat. At this moment, for the Islamic Republic, women are still a threat. And I'll tell you an anecdote from my interrogation, and then let Jeff give you his opinion. I was told that, my interrogator told me, we can deal with protesters, male protesters, but what if you have hundreds of thousands of women coming out into the streets? So, this was...
You bet.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jeff?
Why don't we try to get to some of the questions? I thought you answered that perfectly.
Okay. Thank you both.
Thank you, Congresswoman Harman. So we have a few questions from the audience. Has there been any institutionalization of this movement in or outside of Iran, an organization that has emerged from this or seeks to work on this issue?
Shall I take?
Haleh, yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Look, Shirin Ebadi, who was in Iran, both working with, Nasrin was working with her, and then Narges Mohammadi, whom we saw was her deputy. I mean, she has been organizing and supporting the women's movement from abroad. But the women who are on the ground are the ones who will bring in the change. You give guidance from abroad, but it is the foot soldiers on the ground, and it's the women who are in Iran who were after the 1 million signature demand that Jeff made, and other demands, so it's a cooperation between the two sides.
And Haleh, are these women organized into different entities, or are they institutionalized as part of an organization, or are they all part of different communities that work together?
No, they can't be institutionalized because then that, they will stop them, just like they arrested the leaders of the 1 million
campaign
signature. That will not happen, but they are in contact with each other. They know of, because of social media. They have access to Instagram and Telegram and everything possible you can imagine. So it is a kind of virtual community.
Yeah, and like you said, the social media aspect is crucial. We've seen the role it plays in other parts also in the region. Jeff, do you want to add anything to this?
No, I just amplify it and say that constant pressure and also supporting groups in the West that are doing the good work of putting on that pressure. PEN America, Amnesty International, other groups like that, Center for Human Rights in Iran, they all make a difference as well. And having them be collectively together and saying the same thing is really effective.
Thank you. There's a question addressed to you, Jeff, about the process of collecting the footage, despite, of course, the authorities' censorship. if you can talk a little bit about that, and then the distribution of the film.
Sure. Well, first of all, even if I could have gone to Iran, showing up with a big crew and having an American director running around with Nasrin on the streets of Tehran would not have been a good way to get the kind of access we got. And we were very lucky to work with some very brave people who put themselves at risk to film with Nasrin. And I have to say that everyone you saw in the film, whether it was Nargis Hosseini, who removed her hijab in the Girls of Revolution Street protest, or others, they all signed a release to be in the film, just as if we shot it in New York City. And that they all knew what the risk is. Who knows better than them? And I find that so incredibly moving. So we had a number of sources that would get the footage out, and I can't say how we got it out. And sometimes there'd be a big lag. Sometimes there were, in one case, there was almost a year lag between what we knew was coming and when we actually got it. And you can imagine the expectation too when you're watching the footage and logging it. Yeah, it was a cross world cooperative effort. And then obviously there's the whole team here that helps put it together as well. Distribution, we are part of doing an impact campaign now. The film's going to be at Doc NYC, which is a very big film festival coming up in November. Many other screenings of Amnesty France has an annual film festival, and the film will be there. And there'll be a theatrical release in January and beyond that. But again, if people go to the website, which is www.nasrinfilm.com, we're always updating information about Nasrin herself personally, events that you could participate in, and then ways that you can help Nasrin and others like her.
Great, thank you for that, because there was actually a question about what could people, particularly in the West, do. Just want to get back to the distribution. Are you worried that the authorities might disrupt the distribution?
Well, we're looking forward to actually the Farsi version being available around the world and in Iran soon. You know, while we were making the film, I can't tell you how many times either Marsha or I would say to Nasrin, you know, if this is going to put you at risk, we will stop now. You know, we love the idea of this film, but we don't want to put you or anyone else at risk. And she always said, no, you know, we need to do this. There's a saying that's in the film that I love where Nasrin says, we must not be silent. And Reza has said several times, you know, like putting Nasrin now in Garshak prison, they're trying to make Nasrin go away. They're trying to keep her silent. And she's always been brilliant on getting her voice out. So everything about the release of the film is about amplifying that voice. And like Haleh said, finding multiple voices to sort of give it an even bigger boost.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for that. And as Haleh said too, that there are multiple mini Nasrins that this movement has created over the years. So we're running out of time, so I just want to sort of to wrap this up with final thoughts from both of you. This has been a very enriching conversation and very inspiring. So Haleh and Jeff, if you could just comment about, you know, beyond the work of the, you know, NGOs and human rights sort of, you know, ecosystem worldwide, what can some of the governments in the West do to ensure Nasrin's safety and freedom, but also basically the fate of others, other political prisoners in Iran? Haleh?
Yeah, I can talk about my own experience. If you can get the government at a very high level interfere with their counterpart in Iran, I mean, if let's say hypothetical case in Nasrin's case, country which is friendly with Iran, let's say India, if you can get, let's say, foreign minister for France, call the foreign minister of India and say, look, we are very much interested in the release of this woman activist. Her name is so-and-so. So he is going to probably pass on the message, you know, to the highest authorities in Iran. So the higher the authorities get in touch with Iran, the more chance you have of getting these people out. I'm talking about my own experience, because at the level of NGOs and so on, it's very good because you keep the momentum, you keep this alive. But to have an impact, it has to come at a very high level. As Jane said, when she was on the Hill, I mean, not only the women on Congress, but actually the whole Congress signed the petition, more or less, asking for my release. But I was a dual national, so it's slightly different.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Haleh. Jeff?
Yeah, I'd say two things. When we talked to Nasrin about doing this film in the first place, she always said that she wanted it to be about others as well. And we wanted to tell a story that was a community story that, you know, she was the face of, but that showed there were so many women, so many people working for human rights in Iran. That's, I think, a lesson not just for Iran, but all over the world. And so I think this also has to come back. If we're here in America, it has to come back to this country as well. We have an election coming up, which really, I think, will define the soul and the fate and the character of this country. And we need to demand that this country stand up for human rights again. Right now, we have no moral voice. We've destroyed the moral voice. Whatever, it was fragile and illusory anyway. But the moral voice of this country is now in tatters. We need to reestablish that. We need to have this country stand for human rights, not just for someone who we have financial interest in, but for people everywhere. And we need to apply that for this country too. You can't break up a peaceful demonstration in the United States with tear gas because you don't like what they're saying and then call for human rights in another country. So we need to get our own house in order. And by the way, we'll all feel better about ourselves at the same time. And that's the best way to have a voice that is really clear and really stands for something. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, and voting is a very good way as well.
Thank you, Jeff. And like you said, you tried to capture not only the story of Nasrin, but the community around her, and you absolutely did a fabulous job with that, because that's one of the impressions I was left with, how extensive this network is and how strong and brave and committed that community is. It's inspiring, not only to us sitting here in the US, but I think to many others in the region, because we have seen human rights abuses, and we've seen the young ones particularly protesting and at the helm of all of this. I want to thank you, Jeff, and Haleh, for this enriching discussion, and most importantly, for all the very inspiring work that you do in the pursuit of justice, particularly during these trying and uncertain times. And we hope to host you in person to further these conversations, post COVID-19. I encourage all of our viewers to also spread the word about the film, follow the website to see where else it's being shown. And thank you for giving the Wilson Center this opportunity to view this really compelling documentary. So thanks to all viewers, and we look forward to hosting you in more events in the future.